But I'll say now, let's get rolling because I get to be live with Mark McGrath today, which I am quite excited about. It's funny. I was like reflecting on what I want to talk to you about today. I was trying to come up with a name of the podcast. And you and I, as I've read your stuff more and more over the past 6 months, for sure, I've been following you longer than that. We write about pretty similar things, with much different language and from different contexts. So as you know, I write about the skill that is resilience. I use a lot of psychological concepts, maybe some concepts from Stoicism in the past, and then just life experiences through training, stress management in the military. So I do bring in some military concepts, but my goodness, do you do a great job of bringing up military concepts, particularly from the lens of John Boyd and Marshall McLuhan, but strategic thinking when it comes to the environment and inputs and how they shape our mindsets, our orientation. And so you use very similar language, like I'll say cognitive flexibility and you'll say reorientation, or observation, the OODA loop, and I'll talk about just conscious living when you're awake. So consciousness. And I always love looking for overlap and things that I believe in wholeheartedly. And then just read about through a different lens. And again, I mentioned in the note, I feel like I get continued education when it comes, like I should get units for my certification and stuff from reading your work because of the deep dives you do on history, on the figures that you write on often, but also on just how you're applying it with AGLX and everything you're doing now. I'd love to know a little bit about the overview of kind of your evolution from an artillery officer in the Marine Corps to what you're doing these days.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. This is as we talked about earlier. I'm no stranger to live broadcasts. People may or may not see me on another one later on today, and so I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate you sending people my way over to the world of reorientation and tuning into the podcast. I had a background. I've had a very eclectic background that got me here. I'll try to give you the thumbnail sketch because I don't want to, we got a lot to talk about and I don't want to take away from that. I was born an Army brat to a West Pointer who was a career officer, and very early was exposed to everything you could think of, living in different regions of our own country, living in other countries, and knowing immediately I did not want to be in the Army, that my obsession with the ocean needed to be satisfied some way, somehow. Originally, I desired to be a Navy pilot and wound up discovering the Marine Corps at an all-boys Catholic high school at the encouragement of our disciplinarian, who was a U.S. Marine, and had something to do with me getting in a fist fight and having to go to the recruiter's office. And I went there and was sold immediately because the naval aspect of it and being at sea with sort of the elite fighting aspect of it too, and the team concept was really appealing to me. And I did not follow my dad's footsteps and go to West Point. I decided to go Naval ROTC. I went to Jesuit school. I went to Marquette. And then I did 6 years active duty in the Marine Corps as an artillery officer. And then I spent 2 years as a recruiter before I got into the civilian world. My initial go around was in medical sales, where I started having these awakenings of, why am I seeing things differently than other people? Why is it, what's causing me to look at the same thing and see opportunity where others were seeing, something totally different? Why is it that I'm able to go do X and other people won't do it, but it's working here? And it's, so I realized I started looking at things differently. I got bored to tears really quick with medical sales, and I got into asset management. I was there for 17 years before I joined up with AGLX with Punch and our other partners. And I was really into, I still am into markets and the fluctuations, the chaos of just every day being completely different, working with people inside of that chaos. And when I came in 2005, right after that, not long after that, the great financial crisis, it was creeping on us. And then all of a sudden it suddenly happened, and the market went to hell in a handbasket. But even then I was astonished that these people were jumping off of buildings or jumping in front of subway trains or into trucks on the New Jersey Turnpike. I didn't understand. I kept telling myself, well, no one's shooting at us, and there's no kids with suicide vests. I mean, we whatever this is, we can get through it. So I had a very differentiated approach than someone that had come up through the come up through the system. And that's when I started really getting aggressive about going back and understanding what it is that I had learned through the warfighting curriculum in the Marine Corps. And it brought me back to John Boyd. And I was very familiar at the time with sort of the the institutional loop that we're given, and the sort of the overview that we're given of John Boyd. But then I got into greater depth, and a lot of things happened at the time. So right around '07, it was another Substacker, now Substacker, but John Robb, who writes the Global Guerrillas Report. I'd come into contact with his original website. And then he had a book called Brave New War, and I started reading it, and it made total sense to me. So I started digging further and further on Boyd. Um, Rob was the one that got me to think about Marshall McLuhan beyond the medium is the message phrase, to realize that there was a lot more depth to what he was saying. And I started to teach and apply these things inside of my asset management career. My functional job was wholesaling inside of investment institutions, and how I did that was by teaching them John Boyd and teaching them OODA loop sketch and how to apply nonlinear thinking in nonlinear environments. And then in the beginning of 22 is when I joined up with Punch and the guys over here at AGLX, and we're all veterans. Punch and I are the two collaborators on the podcast No Way Out, and then Punch contributes over here to the Whirl of Reorientation as well, that I had started at the end of, I believe, towards the end of 2023. So we're coming up on 2 years. Originally, when the Substack started, it was just more along the lines of, I want to find another venue to test these ideas that I'm putting on LinkedIn that nobody seems to give a shit about. And I found a better audience. And then I just got more into the sort of the art form of writing and thinking about these things. And I had a lot of stuff penned up that I could never publish when I was in asset management, because there was very strict regulations on what you could say or outside business things that you could do. But once I was an entrepreneur with Punch and the other guys, those shackles came off, and I could basically say what I wanted. But the commitment around No Way Out and the Whirl of Reorientation has always been around, one, serving as a memorial to John Boyd, who got no credit in his own lifetime, but also two, more, and this is more importantly, and I think that this is what he would have wanted, is to not be static and not create a stone granite memorial to him. It has to be dynamic, and we have to build on his ideas, and that's what we do. So you hear us talk about Marshall McLuhan and Teilhard de Chardin and Austrian economics and all this other stuff. That's building on top of what Boyd did. We're trying to fuse it all into snowmobiles, just like Boyd would say. We're trying to fuse things to enhance his ideas, but also to enhance others. So, like, for example, McLuhan, I think that if you know John Boyd, you should know Marshall McLuhan, because knowing both is better than knowing one, and vice versa. If you know nothing of Boyd but you know everything of Marshall McLuhan, it's better to know about one, the other one too, because it'll enhance how you think of things. And in this world that we live in, I find it's more relevant than ever.
And I'm glad you brought No Way Out, because it's a phenomenal podcast. And you and Ponch also go on many other really large podcasts to talk about these concepts. And by all means,
Yeah.
I enjoy writers who don't kind of do public facing talking, but it adds another layer of credibility. I know you guys are teaching this through AGLX, but boy, do you talk about it as well as you write about it. And you're both powerful writers.
Yeah. Punch and I, how we met actually was actually LinkedIn. Back when LinkedIn was useful. So this is back in the days. This is before I was writing articles on Substack shitting on LinkedIn. But back in the day when LinkedIn actually was doing what it was supposed to do, there's this guy out there, Brian Rivera, and I'm reading his stuff on Boyd and the OODA loop, and I think, wait a minute, he sees the OODA loop like I do. And I started interacting with him. Lo and behold, a few years later, I buy into the company, and we're business partners. And our first time we ever met in person was actually in Quantico. We went to the Boyd archives together and spent 2 days just plowing through Boyd's handwritten stuff. But that's how Punch comes at it from a completely different angle. He's more interested in sort of the neuroscience, a lot of the other science. He talks a lot about active inference, free energy principle, which is all very critical stuff, and I enjoy it too. My background is more liberal arts. Punch was a Navy jet guy. I'm a Marine artillery officer, so that went to Jesuit school. So, reading philosophy, history, writing. That's sort of my background. Whereas Punch comes at from a different angle, but that's also the beauty of Boyd and McLuhan is that the multidisciplinary nature of it. You can come to the same conclusion from different backgrounds. So we complement each other. We complement each other well that way. I like to, you know, quasi jokingly, but also quasi seriously, that it's like a Lennon McCartney type thing. Ponch can be extremely poignant about what he says, and I try to deliver a little more melody and art to it. But I think that that's my liberal arts background versus his fighter aviation background. But I think they work well together, and that's what I don't know. It's never a dull moment when we get on a topic and we get with a guest. So we've got now. I mean, we've got well over 100 episodes. We want to keep charging away at that. We love being guests too, so I've done quite a few guest appearances. I'm actually going to fly out to my my second in studio. My first in studio podcast was actually with Sam Alimo, who we both know, who's also been a guest on our show. I went down to Philadelphia from here in Manhattan to be on his show.
I'll plug that in a summary because that was a phenomenal podcast. I really enjoyed that one. You guys riff
Yeah,
off
yeah. Sam and I, and that was an abbreviation. I mean, Sam and I could have had we could have gone on for like a Lex Friedman 4 or 5 hours, and that would have been part one, and then but I'm going to go out to California here in a bit and be a guest on a show in a studio, which is cool. I do a lot of the public stuff, which is great, and Punch does too. So we've both been guests on Marcus Aurelius Anderson's show. We've both been on Ed Brenegar's podcast, Hunter Hastings podcast. So yeah, we get around and get the message out, and it's multidisciplinary. So there's a lot of backgrounds, and I'll say all the time, it only applies where humans make decisions. So as long as humans can make decisions, then this stuff applies, and you should pay attention to it.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you guys are doing it because you speak to the OODA loop and many other things very well and very differently than what a lot of people have exposure with. So you talk about Bad Boyd or basically misinterpretations and then education on John Boyd's strategic thinking. Because by the way, I called you a savage student in my note about today's conversation because one, the savage part is you're because you apply these concepts to your own life, you're not influenced very well by outside inputs, or we're all shaped by our environment. But when you have that knowledge and you are familiar with VUCA and the ability to reorient within your environment to help optimize your own performance regardless of circumstance, which is what I try to write on. I try to write on developing skills within so you can function in the environment regardless. But at the same time, it's impossible if you're not realizing that, of course, the environment around you is also shaping you inward. So it's a duality there. But
Yeah.
you guys do such a good job of talking about perspective being reality and that you can shift your perspective to influence your reality. But take John Boyd's system and expand upon just that. It's a circular loop, but it's very linearly taught. My only exposure before you was I took the aviation survival training so I could be a passenger in different naval aircraft. I've done that twice. And the second time that I did it, before I did the Helo Dunker, on the wall, you see the OODA acronym. And I asked some people about it after, and I got which of course they weren't teaching it. So it's very cookie cutter. Like this is
Yeah.
the decision-making process that pilots go through to make effective decisions in their environment. And okay, there you go. Didn't know much about Boyd. Definitely didn't know anything about McLuhan before that. But reading these systems, and just like you, Boyd, savage learner up to his death. He was evolving his system, making new diagrams. You posted a picture of like his evolved OODA loop, and it
Yeah.
was not circular. It was the 4 stages, but they all interplay in different way. And that one I had to reread 3 times just because it blew my mind, and like how great of a system that is to think about how we can optimize our performance regardless of circumstance.
Yeah. I mean, our mission is authentic Boyd, and authentic Boyd is not a circular OODA loop used in certain tactical decisions that gets used. I'm going to use it here, and this phase is the most important phase, and that's all bunk. Boyd designed he was trying to understand creativity. He was trying to understand learning. He was trying to understand by asking questions on himself, like how is it that he, as a young captain, senior first lieutenant to being a young captain, came up with the definitive air-to-air combat study? Or how did I, as a major, come up with energy maneuverability theory? What is it that was so special about me? And it was in 76, which is critical because that's the year that I was born. I was born in 76. He wrote a paper called Destruction and Creation. And one of the easiest tells of bad Boyd is they've never read Destruction and Creation. Maybe they reference it, but they don't understand it at all. They've never read it. They don't understand it. They don't understand that it fuses three critical concepts that no one had ever done before, to do what Boyd basically said. We're no system within itself is going to be able to verify its own efficacy, and the more that you try to do that, the more confusion and disorder is going to increase. And if we do that, we're never going to improve our capacity for free and independent action. And when you tell people that have been thinking bad Boyd in the linear loop of just trying to have a tool to make decisions, it's laughable. Sometimes I get sent, people will email me papers and things to review, and almost immediately you can tell that they've never read Destruction and Creation. And maybe they read it, but they didn't apply it. They didn't understand it. And they talk about OODA in phases. And if it's military people, I don't necessarily fault them because we don't really learn the authentic Boyd the way Boyd intended. We sort of get the tactical fighter pilot myth, which is all a bullshit myth. I'm happy to unpack why that's a bullshit myth, but not that he wasn't a badass fighter pilot, not that he wasn't arguably one of the greatest ever lived and one of the greatest instructors ever lived, but to think that the OODA loop is a product of his fighter pilot days is it's not accurate. And to your point about the epistemology of Boyd and the things that went into it, it's so multidisciplinary. It's ridiculous. It's science, math, engineering, philosophy, history, art, literature, Eastern thinking, and so many things. And when you limit and box it into a decision cycle that you tape up on your HUD in your fighter jet or on the wall in the helo dunk or whatever, or on a bulletin board in a break room, you've screwed yourself. And your competitors are, if they look at it, Boyd, authentically, they're going to take you to the cleaners. And the cool thing is, you'll never know what hit you. It'll be over before you know it. And
your own OODA loop disrupted.
Yeah,
you've been shocked by somebody applying it.
Well, you notice on the Whirl when I write it, I most often say, I write it, I make every attempt to write OODA loop in quotes and then sketch, because really it's the OODA loop sketch that is the valuable piece. The OODA loop only understood as OODA loop sketch as Boyd drew it. He only drew it one time, and that was in his last ever briefing before he died. And it was his own words, OODA loop sketch. That's the important thing. That's what's misunderstood. And it doesn't have 4 phases with 4 arrows that all connect. It has several phases and arrows and things that intersect and point back to each other. And if you go on the Whirl, everybody knows that orientation is prime. Implicit or orientation implicitly guides and controls how we sense, decide, act, and learn. And that OODA loop sketch is an illustrative abstraction of how our orientation functions in complex nonlinear environments. And people that don't get that are going to lose. It's just a question of when. Some will be able to hold it off a little longer because they'll have capital or backing, or they'll have momentum in the press or something like that. But if they have a bad interpretation of OODA loop, at some point they have a rendezvous with irrelevance. And the savvy competitors that understand that can exploit that. I always say, we're always looking for David, right? I'm looking for the Davids out there that I can help them become the best David that they can be, so that they can defeat Goliath. And if David for a second thinks that he's Goliath and tries to fight like Goliath, he'll lose 100% of the time. If David thinks like the best David he can be, he's going to win more often than not, because he's going to confound Goliath. He's going to confuse Goliath. He's going to disorient Goliath, and Goliath's probably going to do all his own work himself to implode. Um, the other thing we look for is Goliaths that are trying to think like David. Now they're harder to find, right? There aren't many Goliaths out there that want to think like a David, because they don't want to take the risk, or they don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize their career. So those are a lot harder to find. But for the Davids out there, yeah, those are the ones that this stuff really can benefit.
I love the point about looking for Goliaths that want to think like David, but even just to recognize your own vulnerability. So, like, maybe you are Goliath, and maybe you are the top of the heap. But as soon as you get complacent, as soon as you get certain, which you talk very well about the concept of certainty, uncertainty, which I love. I love
Yeah.
looking through the lens of uncertainty in basically every aspect of life. I don't believe there are too many absolute truths. And as soon as you check a box, and then you put that aside because you think you're squared away there, you're probably going to start slipping. But trying to find those Goliaths that are trying to at least view themselves like David, so you can assess your own developing weaknesses where you have opportunities. What a cool analogy to use.
If you do it right, and you say, look at yourself, when you do it right, you hold up the mirror to yourself and you're honest with yourself. That's what OODA loop. If you're doing it right, you should be self-reflective, and you should say, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses. I need to expand my strengths and build upon them, but I also need to be aware of my weaknesses. Opponents don't always hold the mirror up to themselves, right? And then when you hold the mirror up to them, they don't know what to do, and they wind up imploding and doing all the work. So when you get really good at this stuff and you learn it, and not just know it, but also understand it, and you can teach people how their opponents, whether it's a football game, whether it's a business transaction, you can show them how their opponents are going to do all the work for them, and they're oftentimes not even going to have to fire a shot. But that comes with the willingness to do the work. Punch says this all the time on the show. It's like, if you don't do the work, we're not offering magic pills. Like, you have to be willing to do the work. I mean, my clients, I make them read stuff, because if they can't read it or don't read it or don't understand, grasp the concepts, they're never going to be able to apply them. And I can't go in there and throw Band-Aids around. And we're not prescriptive. We don't run around handing out prescriptions. We're trying to get people to subscribe to an understanding of what it is that they have to do, what it is that they constantly have to keep doing over and over and over again, to get really good at, so that they can thrive in their own circumstances.
You make your subscribers read stuff too, not only your own posts, but you link to Boyd, to McLuhan, to
Yeah.
interviews, to other accounts. And it's so good because it helps you dig deeper in the way that you've done already.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's, leaders are readers. And if you're not reading, you're screwing yourself. You can't lead if you're not reading and learning and challenging you're constantly challenging your assumptions. There's a lot of great, a lot of the great Substacks, some that we've mentioned, like Sam Alaimo, yours, Adam Karraus, others, that are linking and telling you to read this stuff, like to read and, trying to get people to learn. If you're not learning, you're not adapting. If you're not adapting, you're going to become extinct. I see Phil Gentile just joined us. The military reading room. There you go, right off the bat. Why do the service chiefs in all the branches have professional reading lists? The reason is because they want you to constantly challenge your assumptions. They want you to constantly be learning and to be adaptable. One thing I always loved about being in the Marine Corps was the reading list was taken extremely seriously. And I'm sure it's not that much different these days, but back in my day, open dialogue was promoted and it was encouraged. As a young lieutenant, you should never be afraid to challenge a colonel in a discussion about a book or about something you'd read about in a Marine Corps Gazette article or whatever. And that kind of open dialogue makes everybody better. And if you go back and you look at what Boyd was actually doing, that's what he was trying to get people to do. That, in an organization that's a high trust organization, you should be able to do that. You should be able to share ideas and learn from each other, And learning is not top down. It doesn't come from the top down. It comes top down, bottom up, laterally, in circles. It's dynamic. It's complex.
And learning is uncomfortable. So, like, as soon as we
Yeah.
the merchants of certainty, like you write about, they try to keep you comfortable. They try to answer all of these uncertainties for you that we're all good. We still have it all figured out regardless of what's happened. They try to control the ground by talking about figures, another great concept that you talk about, figure versus ground. But they try to prevent you from thinking outside of the box or from being uncomfortable, but there is no growth without discomfort. And that's true
Yeah.
cognitively, physically, everywhere. And that's going to come from getting outside of your own head, too. So I love how you talk about you and Ponch. Look at John Boyd's teachings very differently, but good because now you'll learn from each other while you're speaking similar conceptual language to the OODA loop sketch and his strategic thinking. But it's going to be
Yeah.
you're going to enhance each other because of the differences you may have in how you're seeing it.
That's the Lennon McCartney aspect of it. That's the
Yeah.
John and Paul aspect of it. John Lennon was a great songwriter. He's a better songwriter because of Paul McCartney challenging him, and vice versa. If you don't have that type of environment in a high trust organization, forget it. You're not going to be able to learn, grow, and develop. The merchants of certainty. I'm sure a lot of people on Substack can relate to that if they've ever been through a corporate consulting engagement. That whole thing started when the CEO was golfing with the CEO of a company is golfing with the CEO of the consulting firm because they both went to the same Ivy League school and prep school, and they have the same club, and their kids are dating or whatever. And he says, "Oh man, I gotta cut 25% or else my stockholders are gonna torch me." And the merchants of certainty come in with the goal of reducing 25% one way or the other. And they're going to basically do cosplay and dress it up in motivational quotes and books and whatever. But the whole entire thing is horseshit. It doesn't make people better. It's going to have a lot of, slides and slogans and slippery slopes and things like that, but it's not going to have any long-term value. We try to create with our work, we try to create a consulting function internally. So when we come in, think of more of an embedded liaison officer. In a corporation, by the way, we're going to be a lot cheaper than the merchants of certainty. But think of it more like an embedded liaison officer that's a strategic advisor that's going to help you build this within and push out, rather than come in and create a lot of anxiety and alienation amongst your people.
But what I also love about what you do is just like Boyd, you're not teaching doctrine, and you've had some great teachers.
No.
You're not teaching something that's prescriptive. You're teaching people how to think in an uncertain world, in an uncertain life. I mean, we don't even know what tomorrow will bring for ourselves, let alone the world. So if you can get comfortable with VUCA, which is just reality, and if you can apply that to your life and your thinking to assess your own vulnerabilities, to look for opportunities, to be comfortable being uncomfortable, both in conversation and in general, you're going to have the capacity to grow. So you're teaching strategic thinking rather than having to understand someone's business inside and out. No, you're telling experts how to be experts in a world that is, without question, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Yeah. Yeah. We shy from the term expert. So Boyd, there's a couple terms that Boyd hated. He took them as personal insults. So expert was one, because he thought that an expert was a know-it-all. That people, they say, "Are you an expert on John Boyd?" And I say, "No, I'm a student of John Boyd. I'm not an expert, because I'm always trying to learn." And what I know from acolytes, the acolytes is the collective name for the group of his closest collaborators, and for the ones that we interact with quite a bit who are still with us, they tell us all the time, "I'm still learning this stuff all the time." And John Boyd's been dead for almost 30 years. He's still teaching us. The other term was analyst. An analyst he would call a half-wit, because on the other side of analysis has to be synthesis. Creation has to have destruction. If you don't have that, then you're just going to go in a circle. It's like two jet engines, only one's working, and you're just going to go in circles the whole time. So expert and an analyst, and he said, "Don't ever call me an analytical expert." That was the other one. That was the worst. These are the massive insults to him. So, yeah. So, you're talking earlier about learning, and we're talking about reading lists. If you're not a learner, if you're not a student, you're going to have a really hard time with the stuff that we're teaching. McLuhan said it best. He says, I'm exploring. And by exploring, you're constantly learning, you're constantly discovering. I don't think Boyd would disagree with that at all. All the things that he did points to that same exact thing, and that's kind of our approach too.
Yeah, applying labels to others or yourself, you're just gonna get yourself caught really quickly. So, like, even if I were to call myself a good dad, like, I think most people would agree with that I am, but really it's only because if I am, it's because 'cause I'm aspiring to live up to that every day, and that's
Yeah,
true. I think so. It's very funny that Boyd was not a fan of the word expert or the label expert, because that just, again, indicates that you've reached some place where you can get complacent, checks that box, and not keep learning. So, continuous learning.
that's where you want to look for experts, because if you're competing, you want to look for experts because they're vulnerable. So, like, say in football, you want that braggart that says, "Well, I come from the Bill Walsh coaching tree, and this is how we've always done it, and this is how we do it." They're going to collapse and cave every time to an innovative thinker that's able to see something that they don't, because they're not learning anymore.
I've
So
always found the biggest opportunities with the teams that I've worked with and organizations that I've been in. When I ask a question and I get the answer because this is how we've always done it, I know right then and there's going to be opportunity for significant improvement. It's been the time
yeah,
in that way every time.
yeah, that's how you defeat them. That's how you get defeated, because if you know that you've always done it that way, guess what? Your competitors do too. And if they learn this stuff and you haven't, you're gonna have some problems.
100%. And
Yeah.
another thing I really like doing with your work is applying it to myself. So everything
Mm,
you write about, it often comes from the lens of business, strategic thinking within organizations, whether it's against competition or assessing yourself, it has that professional feel. But boy, you change a few words or really just apply it to yourself. It
yeah.
really helps how I operate at home and in general. You mentioned a high trust organization. I've gone through periods in my life where I thought the best significant other for me would be someone who's very agreeable with me. It doesn't challenge my assumptions, beliefs, or my actions in particular. And very thankfully, life led me to finding my spouse because I'm in a high trust marriage where I have someone who will call me out really quick in a
Mhm.
respectable way. But challenge me so I don't get stuck in linear operations and do what is insane, the same thing over and over and expect a different result. And name the capacity or the part of my life. I thankfully have checks and balances at home and work with people because of high trust who kind of understand the values that we're trying to achieve together.
I I once, long ago, years ago, I um had applied to work on a political campaign, because this stuff works anywhere. It certainly works in competitive situations like an election. And this particular candidate, and I won't say state, name, office, none of that, but this person only surrounded themselves with people that agreed with him. Period. A challenging view, something that's going to make him think, something that's going to help him overcome a blind spot. He did not want to hear it at all. It was rubber stamp, rubber stamp, rubber stamp. And it worked out. I ended up not getting the job, and he ended up not getting elected. So it didn't, or, well, actually, it was elected to a higher office than where this person was. But if you're surrounding yourself with yes people, that's another trap and another thing that we try to help organizations with. So yeah, if you're not around people that challenge you, like I said, like a coaching staff. I mean, I would hope that if I'm the head coach of a football team and my coordinators aren't challenging me to think differently, then I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. And if their coaches under them are not challenging them to be better, they're gonna be in a lot of trouble. And if they're not listening to players and getting their feedback, you know, the whole thing is going to unravel at some point. And you've seen it happen. You see all these guys become head coaches that just they can't get it done at all, because they're so good at whatever it is that they think they can do, but they're not good at working with others in the sense of getting feedback and reorienting and adapting. They don't put trust and push decisions down to the lowest possible level. They don't develop talent. You've seen my article, the Mike Tomlin Renaissance. Will it happen? This is the third year I could write that. Will it happen? And to my knowledge, at the time I had published that article, to my knowledge, I don't think there's one person in the Mike Tomlin coaching tree. I don't think that he's developed any talent. Whereas, you can compare and contrast across the league at other coaches that are doing that, but that's a cultural thing, about the organizational culture that you build and how you train and develop others and how you empower them to lead and you empower them to make decisions and you empower them to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. That's in complex, non-linear competitive environments. I think that's really important.
Yeah, he's starting to get the credit where it's due, but Greg Popovich of the NBA and what he did with the Spurs dynasty back in the day, but even more impressive than what he did with that basketball team and all the championships that they had was the coaches that he developed and how the success that is sprinkled throughout the league, and coaches at high level. He has his hands all over so many of the highest level coaches over the past several decades, and that really,
Where'd he go to college?
I don't know where to go.
This is important to the story. Where did Greg Popovich go to college?
I do not know the answer to this question.
It's a high trust place, a high trust organization with camaraderie and trusting each other and learning from each other. He went to the Air Force Academy.
Hey,
We're as naval officers, we could laugh at the Air Force, but the one thing that they do, like any other service academy, other military branches, they promote and generate a high trust culture. So, Mike Krzyzewski went to West Point. Is there any shock and surprise that he created a lasting, enduring culture where talent was developed, where coaches were developed? No. Popovich is no exception either.
Yeah, you see these people who take experiences and lessons from other domains and then apply them to new domains and try to converge concepts specifically in the domain, but the concept can remain and be translated anywhere. And a lot of these great leaders are really good at doing that. Like you talk about expert or depth. It's very important when you are a subject matter expert and have great depth of experience in that particular domain. That's very impressive. However, if that is all you have, you're extremely vulnerable. You're not going to be very helpful outside of that one specific lane. And as the world continues to evolve and change, you'll probably be put aside by breadth of experience and thinking. And again, what John Boyd did and what you teach now really teaches just breadth of thought, and orientation, no matter the circumstance.
I mentioned Punch and I have spent days in the archives in Quantico reading his handwritten notes, going through a lot of his books. I mean, the book list, the John Boyd book list is psychotic. I mean, it's just unbelievable how much reading this guy did. And what's even crazier is when you go through these books in the archives is the margin notes. And what's also interesting is you say breadth and depth. They weren't limited to military. There's books on evolutionary biology. In fact, one of his favorite books was called How the Leopard Changed Its Spots. It was about about evolutionary biology. There's philosophy. There's Alan Watts books. I mean, people are familiar with Alan Watts. There's books by Alan Watts. Oddly enough, no Marshall McLuhan. However, he did bracket around a lot of the things that McLuhan was reading too, which is really, really strange that he never would read McLuhan. There's two guys I wish Boyd would have read, and one was Marshall McLuhan, of course, but the other one's Ludwig von Mises. And there's a lot of things that Ludwig von Mises, who's an economist, that he had written, that there's a lot of parallels and similarities with Boyd. What's interesting is that Mises' student Friedrich Hayek, John Boyd did in fact read him, and he was one of the references in the later versions of his briefing Patterns of Conflict. So, it's sometimes it's really cool to see the scope of Boyd's knowledge and learning. It's really something.
He refused to be an expert. He was a continuous learner for life, and that you could see it in his own evolution. Again, I know most of this based on the post that you have, because I feel like it's a deep dive into so many areas, but the theme of Boyd and his evolution is continuous learning continues to come about. And it's true also just of like that final sketch that he created of the OODA loop. When I think about that sketch, you very wisely named your Substack account the Whirl of Reorientation, because that sketch is what demonstrates that orientation is a component of every step of your linear four-phase OODA loop. It's not linear at all. It's non-linear, and that sketch shows it, but it shows the value of reorientation at every step as feedback of inputs and controls so you can continue to maximize your function regardless of what you're observing. The decision you make, it's immediate feedback, and you can reorient it if you get any feedback on it. And then, of course, the actions that you're taking. It's all ways to learn and grow and evolve.
I'll put it in the chat right now, but we actually we did a full transcript of John Boyd's conceptual spiral. And the briefing conceptual spiral is where the term no way out and the term the whirl of reorientation come from. And what Boyd was saying was that there's all these factors of our universe that we can't change or eradicate, like uncertainty and entropy, basically VUCA. So because of that, there's no way out of the whirl of reorientation. Otherwise, you're going to be, caught flat-footed and defeated. You'll lose. That's if you're not constantly creating and destroying your models. The other thing that is interesting about John Boyd is that he thought that any of his briefings, like patterns of conflict, I think there's something like 40 versions of it. Sometimes he would change a punctuation mark. Sometimes he would change a couple of words and add to it. Others, he would make pretty significant changes. Everything that he did was constantly revised because he was always learning. And he would tell people flat out, and in fact, it's in that transcript. They'll just drop your email and they'll send you a PDF. But it'll tell you what he says in there is like, if you think this is doctrine, if you think what I'm telling you is doctrine, take it out and burn it right now. Because the universe that we live in, the world that we live in is constantly in a state of flux. It's always changing. And if you're going to think statically, and if you're going to take this as an ossified, this is the way it works, and that's the end of it, then you're gonna fail. There's nothing that Boyd wrote or, the only thing he really published was the aerial attack study, energy maneuverability theory, and destruction creation. That's really it. And on these types of topics, really destruction creation, just an 11-page paper. That's it. Everything else was done through briefing. And those briefings were interactive. They're constantly learning. Ian Brown, who we just recorded with today, he's been on our show before. He wrote a book called The New Conception of War about John Boyd and his influence on the Marine Corps. But he's just come out with another one called Snowmobiles and Grand Ideals, which he co-authored with Franz Osinga. And Franz Osinga wrote the definitive book on Boyd's theory called Science, Strategy, and War. And this particular book, I can throw a link to it here in the chat as well. It's free. You can get it on PDF. But basically what it is, what Ian did was transcribed from recordings, audio recordings of all the things that we have about of Boyd's giving these briefings. So patterns of conflict and organic design for command and control. So he went through, it took him a few years to do it too. It wasn't something that happened overnight, and put these together. So now we actually have Boyd in his own words as best we can. And that gives context to, if you just took the briefings and you just read all the briefings, that's not bad. But if you're not engaging or having dialogue around them, you're missing out. And then what these transcripts show is the engagement, the dialogue with the audience that's going back and forth, which is really cool. And the other cool thing about what Ian Brown has done is that he's published all of these books through the Marine Corps University Press. So you can get the PDF online for free. Also, you can get the hard copy. The hard copy is going to be coming out here in a month or two. You can order it for free. So your tax dollars, if you're a United States citizen, your tax dollars paid for it. So you might as well take advantage of it. But it's a good thing that you can mark up. Now, I've seen all these transcripts before, and I've listened to the audio recording, and they're phenomenal. But to have it in a book and to see it printed out so far in the PDF, it's really a treasure. And then for those that are serious about learning this stuff, this is another way to take it.
I love it. It's just the people that are willing to go deep and figure these things out, and transcribing briefings to make a book that consolidates a lot of his wisdom. I'm stoked, and then to figure out a way for where we can get it for free. It's like, what a gift.
Yeah. Well, again, your tax dollar, again, if you're a U.S. citizen, your tax dollars paid for it. So it's free online. The other thing that's free online is one that we refer to a lot is a discourse on winning and losing, and that comes from not I was going to say Graham Hancock, Grant Hammond, who's from the Air Force War College, and he consolidated. Basically, Boyd had this sort of uh, collection of all of his briefs that he called the Green Book, and the formal name was a discourse on winning and losing. And then Grant Hammond recompiled it and added destruction and creation and added some commentary to it, and it's really phenomenal. But it's another one that it's free. Your tax dollars paid for it. And you can get this one from the Air Force War College, and I'll put that in the chat as well right now. So I put three things. I got the transcript to Conceptual Spiral. Ian Brown's latest with all the transcripts of all the briefs, which include the conceptual spiral. But then the last one is the discourse on winning and losing.
Love it. And
So
you recommend great reading all the time in your posts. And sitting behind me is actually a book that you had recommended to me personally in response to a conversation that we had had. But this is a book
yeah,
I had already bought when I was at my first duty station, Camp Lejeune, a Marine Corps base, for those that are unaware. And quick, easy read. However, you talk about a lot of military. And this isn't doctrine, but this is a great philosophical book from Marine Corps war strategy, just called War Fighting. But
yeah.
you talk about Boyd's influence, and like I've read through it again since you recommended it, and I've become a fan of your account and understand Boyd's wisdom a little bit more. And you see it like flavored in there. Like you think of VUCA or uncertainty, and basically how we operate in evolving environments and warfare, and whether or not that was direct from his influence or not. Like these philosophical thinkers that can apply strategies to our thinking in the world that is always going to offer uncertainty. Like I love studying history, not only to learn about successes and where we've come from, but also to see like the failures and where the vulnerabilities were, and then look at it from different angles so we can apply it to our present to again stay outside of conclusive thinking, but being able to reorient despite whatever happens in our environments.
I would tell anybody who would take that book, which I also threw the link to it because again, it's another one your tax dollars paid for. Um, I've been reading and rereading that book for 30 years. I first got that book. Then it was called Fleet Marine Force Manual #1 Warfighting. The one that you have behind you is Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication #1. It's basically the revision. It was revised one time in 1997, not long after Boyd's death. And that book is a philosophy book. And that book, it tells you, being a Marine is a way of thinking. It's a frame of thinking. It's not just F-18s, rifles, camouflage, and bombs and bullets and things like that. It's a way of thinking, a frame of thinking, and that book basically lays it all out. And we're told in the forward from the original and from the version that you have there. Every leader in the Marine Corps, every Marine is expected to read and reread that, and we have people that we know in common. They could vouch that I read that book frequently. And more to the point, I can take that book with anybody in any discipline, and we can sit down and read it together, and we can cross out war fighting, and we can put audiology, we can put football, we can put high stakes sales, whatever. We can take the concepts out of that book and apply it to any situation so long as humans are present. And it works, and it holds. And if you go through the Whirl of Reorientation, you type in warfighting, you'll see some of the examples that I've given. Could be swimming, it could be called. You can call that book anything you want, and all you got to do is just change a few of the words. You change the word, cross out warfighting, and put whatever industry you're in. Cross out enemy and put, competitor, other team, whatever, and you'll see that the concepts carry over.
And this was exactly why you recommended that book to me. And you had talked about how you've recommended it to so many friends of yours because it can be applied to any domain. And so you gave me a few examples of the friends in your life and just changing that word. But again,
Yeah,
convergence of concepts. And that is true of what you're doing with Boyd's strategic thinking, with Marshall McLuhan's message. The medium is the message, and many other things that you've talked about through your posts about him. Like these concepts these are back in, I mean, of course, the 70s, the 60s. These are when they were coming up with these ideas. And then, of course, Boyd continues to evolve them. But this is well before AI and all of these new uh, guerrilla warfare online and what you write about so well. Like they didn't predict the future as far as exactly what's going to happen, but their concepts can be applied to the now and also in the future when we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone 30 years from now. But if you keep
Yeah.
this thinking in place, yes, we can still function effectively if you are orienting to what you truly have control over and what matters.
People would be well served that they could understand the concepts that both Boyd and McLuhan talked about, sort of how we kicked it off. Um, who when we recorded with Ian today, and we'll publish it soon, and everybody can see it. And he's the co-author of the one I put in there, Snowmobiles and Grand Ideals. Um, he's talking a lot about Boyd, and he's relaying a lot of the stuff that he transcribed in various briefs. And I said, and Ian's been reading my McLuhan stuff as well. I said, Ian, you sound a lot like Marshall McLuhan there. And Boyd did have an understanding inherently, even though he'd never read McLuhan to our knowledge, because he's not on any of the book lists. And none of the acolytes that I know had ever remember talking about McLuhan with him, but Boyd got it inherently, and it's important because when you see this stuff, and you saw I wrote it again in the article today. I use this term all the time with McLuhan, Boyd, Teilhard, others. If once you see it, you can't unsee it. It that's the power of this stuff. And when Ponch brought up in how in patterns of conflict, Boyd mentions the word surprise like 80 times, and surprise is an outcome. It's not input. You know, you can't say I'm going to use surprise here because you don't know if I'm going to be surprised or not, right? But he's talking about the reduction of surprise. Shit, I forgot where I was going with that one. We were talking about once you see it though, you can't unsee it. And the point about surprise is that the better you get at this stuff, the more that you engage with this stuff, the more that you, heck, throw it in Google Notebook LM and have dialogue with it and learn and learn. You're going to reduce your surprise. A lot of times there's a catastrophe or a crisis or something in the news, and people say, "Boy, you're awfully calm." And I'll say, "Yeah, because it's not. None of this is surprising." Why is that? Oh, because I understand John Boyd and I read John Robb. And I've been reading that for years, and I don't have any. It helps me reduce surprise so that I can stay focused on whatever needs to be done. But if you're not constantly learning and creating and destroying your perception and your models, as Boyd says, and even as McLuhan says, well, then you're constantly going to be surprised. You're going to be flat-footed, and you're going to get wiped out fast.
I love to talk about the differences between mindsets and mental states. So, like, mindsets are like proactive considerations that we make based on what we've learned, experiences we've had, or things that we're studying to apply to a given domain before we go into it, or maybe even actively as we're in it. They influence mental states for sure, but mental states like surprise, whether they be emotions or whether they just be our function, that's where we are right now. And we can, of course, optimize different ways with self awareness and triggers, if you will, to indicate when we are in a less than productive mental state to maybe shift our functioning and get back to what our intention was. But that's why I called it resilient mental state. Is how can we optimize our function to be resilient despite um, uncertainty and things that you can never truly fully prepare for. However, like you just said, you're not surprised too often because you've evolved your orientation through study of John Boyd, through the life that you've lived to where it's going to be hard to throw you. You're not going to be surprised easy. It still could happen and you'll still need systems to have to respond to that effectively. But the more that you can optimize well because of your mindset that you've developed now, the less likely you're going to have to experience unproductive mental states like
Yeah,
surprise.
yeah,
Yeah, and I get this language from
it-
you all the time because you write on this stuff just a little differently, now a lot differently actually than I do, but the concepts are they're overlaid quite well, when you think about it, where I like take to your work and then apply it to myself and how I can use it for training the skill that is resilience internally, while simultaneously thinking about my environment that's shaping me all the time.
yeah. So, someone and I were having a conversation about what's an autodidact. And an autodidact is a learner that doesn't need a formal classroom, that you you can learn the stuff on your own. And Boyd was certainly that, and I think McLuhan was too. Um, I like to think that I am, although I did have a lot of formal schooling as you had, through grad school and other things. But I really think that there's a difference between training and education. And if people don't understand the difference, and they also don't understand how they complement each other, then I think that you run into a lot of trouble. Um, but education is important, reading is important, and not just reading to find out what to think, but reading to challenge my assumptions, to take contrarian views. Um, because if everybody just goes along with something, then everyone's likely to be wrong.
And if you
So,
need help finding contrarian views, there's a really good Substack account called Contraframe, which looks at different things happening in the world, and almost always, I mean, I'll tend to agree with some of your perspectives on different things that you look at, but the way you frame it, the way you deep dive, you talk about who benefits, who loses, opportunities within it. Like you do a deeper dive on maybe something I'm aware of and would agree with in a certain way, but the way, and they're concise posts, so they're quick, fun, easy reads to help you just practice the skill that I like to call cognitive flexibility, which is more psychological language, but it's reorienting how you would maybe view something without consciously thinking about it and challenging your assumptions.
Contraframe is my own intellectual sort of pet project of, yeah, kind of testing these ideas against just things that I observe and find important. Not everybody does. So, you're riding on a train in the Northeast Corridor. I want to wonder why does the infrastructure suck? Um, what are some other ones? LinkedIn. I had one out not long ago about, YouTube. How did YouTube become what it is? Um, I had one, I think on Friday, was about, are we really that tribal now? Like, are we so tribal that as long as my party is in power, then whatever they do is right, and I don't, I'm inconsistent on concepts and principles. Um, I've written a lot about, like the oceans on Contraframe. Like, why are the oceans so underexplored? Like, why do we know more about Mars than we know about what's in the sea? The sea is something like less than 5% discovered. There's so much about the sea, which is my prime natural obsession is the oceans. I think the oceans are just beyond fascinating. I always joke that Catholic boys high school beat my desire to be an oceanographer out of me. Um, but yeah, no. So on Contraframe, I don't know. I had one on, why do all social justice warriors look the same? But then a day or two later, why do all MAGA people look the same? Like, how is it that these sort of shared consciousnesses, they manifest themselves in a certain way that are observable? So, like, if you're observing patterns and you see these things, um, question it. Don't just take it for granted, or don't just take it. That's sort of the intent behind it. Is how do I challenge assumptions and question that what it is that I see on the surface? What's the ground beneath it? You were talking about figure and ground earlier, and that's a McLuhan term. We're so obsessed with figures. We're so obsessed with what we can see, and while we focus solely on those, the ground shifts beneath us, and we don't know what happened. It's all things visible and invisible, right? But most people only focus on the visible, and they miss the invisible, and the invisible every time is what gets you.
And then you provide frameworks to make the invisible visible. And also, I think you derived the 5T system from kind of thinking about Marshall McLuhan's different messages. Um,
Mhm.
when and how did you come up with 5T? Because that one was very revealing for me. Not only again for the things that I actively, well, sometimes unintentionally, just the environments that are shaping me, the things that I actively pursue that are uncomfortable to make me better, but also just myself and where I'm coming from.
Yeah, 5T. So, I was talking about my dad being a career Army officer and a West Pointer. He was an infantry officer, but his background, his secondary MOS was public affairs, and I like to joke that I was born into the trade, right? So I don't have any formal public relations training at all. Um, but what I found in engaging with the PR firm that we partner with, and becoming another collaborator of mine is the head of this firm, that found us on our a couple of years ago from our podcast, that the applicability of these concepts to public relations and communications and information warfare, narrative warfare, and cognitive warfare were really, really, really spot on. And, you know, sometimes it makes me think, oh, I should have stayed in instead of doing recruiting duty. I should have went to public affairs school, and became a PAO. But through just being an autodidact and understanding these concepts so well and that they apply everywhere, I've been able to show how they work in PR. And Mike Cheronson's his name, and he and I have co-authored some articles. We've appeared on PR podcasts together. We're going to be speaking at the National Convention of the Public Relations Society of America. And again, I have no formal credentialed PR training. I just don't have the time, but I can show you the gaps. I can show you where the gaps are, and I can show you. I've written a lot of. If you go on the Whirl of Reorientation and type in public relations, I've written quite a bit about this, and I do a lot of advisory work on this stuff. But the 5T protocol, to your point, was something that I've been working on for a while. It's like people do frameworks. I don't like templates or overlays or whatever, but a framework that gets me thinking about things as I'm, in this case, consuming information. I thought, well, that's something. Okay, so how do we empower people in fifth generation war and information war, such that they're not going to fall for something, or such that they're going to have a better understanding of what they're being bombarded with, or what was in a commercial or whatever. So the 5T, because I like alliteration too. I think it's like when it's like tut 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 tut, like people will have a better mnemonic with that. But it was terrain, target, tone, trope, and tactics. So what's the ground that's trying to be claimed? And this goes back to McLuhan. What's the environment? What's the domain? Who's being targeted? Who's the target audience? Who is the person directly targeting? And if you read my article about narrative weapons being used against us, there's a very clear target, and there's very clear people targeting. And I wound up in that case, I was actually not going to use that as an example at all. That kind of fell in my lap, and it worked out being this Dr. Emily King, and forget the other woman's name was like Julie Green, and they're published authors with wide followings, and they were targeting very specific people. And I was showing, using their own words, how 5T works, so that when you evaluate it, you can see and have a better understanding of what's someone's intent, what's their motive, what is someone trying to get me to do, or what's someone trying to get me to think. And what are the gaps in their own thinking, their own approach. And in the cases of those two women, their tactics were, their tropes were, we're all in this together. That would be a trope. Their tone is like emotional, like pleading. Oh, this and that. Woe is me. And then the tactics are almost always logical fallacies. So I tell people all the time, if you want to get good and understanding information, because you're subject to the information war. And that's a McLuhan quote that you've seen me quote a lot. Marshall McLuhan said that, in quotes, World War III is, not will be, is a guerrilla information war with no division between civilian and military participation. So here's these two operators in a guerrilla information war targeting a very specific group, very specific people. And I blew the lid on it. And then I almost immediately, well, again, using their own words and identifying all the logical fallacies. So if you study logic and you understand formal and informal logical fallacies, that's going to solve most of your problem. You're going to be able to see through a lot of garbage when you're looking at articles or when you're listening to a speech or anything like that. But then I wrote an article follow-up to that. It was called They Blocked Me. And if you recall, and it was proof that the 5T protocol works. So I was able to detect what they were doing using the 5T protocol. I showed it to them, to their face. I tagged them, and then both of them blocked me. Now, it says a lot when someone I have, over 2,000 subscribers, and these women are in like the 20,000s or whatever, that they have to block me. Like, that's how threatened they feel, though. And it goes back to maybe the David and Goliath thing. Goliath can be vulnerable, and, herd thinkers and group thinkers, that's another reason, like that 5T protocol is so important to learn, because you can you can start to sift through the garbage that you're constantly getting pelted with, and you can see through propaganda, and you can see through advertising, and you don't fall for things as easily, and that's, I think, is really important. I'll drop the first article, and anybody wants to follow up in there if they could. I see that we did get a question though from Andrew. He asked, "What Marshall McLuhan books do you recommend to start out?" I mean, I would read the article that I wrote today about the medium is the massage video. It's 54 minutes on YouTube. With YouTube now, you can watch things twice as fast, so it'd only be, 22 minutes or no, that would be I don't know,
27.
27 minutes. Yeah. 27 minutes. It's entertaining, but it's not designed to entertain. It's designed to teach. And then from there, I would get some of his books that he did with Quentin Fiore. There's The Medium is the Massage that kind of goes with the film. There's another one about advertising called Culture is Our Business. And that's where I get the quote, the guerrilla information war. His magnum opus, the one that you really need to understand, is called Understanding Media. And that's a very big, thick, heavy book. And if you're a founding strategist of the Whirl of Reorientation, we're going to have our monthly Zoom with Andrew McLuhan, who's Marshall's grandson, who teaches Understanding Media, and he makes it actually readable. And we've done a podcast with him that people could look up if you type in Andrew McLuhan on our site. You can also follow his Substack, the McLuhan Institute. We do a lot of collaborating with him. And so I don't know, when I met Andrew, then Understanding Media became a lot easier to comprehend. But that's the critical book, is Understanding Media. That's sort of Marshall McLuhan. That's the book that put him on the map, that how he got all that attention in the 60s was Understanding Media. Then a lot of his books are like The Medium is the Massage or Culture is Our Business. These are kind of like a collection of like sayings and aphorisms with pictures that are getting his point across, but they're designed to entertain. They're designed to teach through entertainment. I think that they're pretty good. Yeah, William Lutz says that the video is really good. You definitely cannot watch it once. You have to watch it several times, and I talk about that in the article. Reading any of these things once is not enough. You have to go over it and over it and over and over it again. And the tools that are out there. I did an article last week about the Playboy interview. So the interview that Marshall McLuhan did in 1969, I guess actually back to Andrew Feller's question, that's where I would start, the Playboy interview. Because in that interview, it's a window into everything McLuhan talks about. And people actually did read Playboy for the articles, and they certainly read it for the interviews, because they're very good. And in a McLuhan sense, they really do a good job of teaching his concepts. So if you get the Playboy interview, and I have a link to it in the article.
Another great post. Yeah, my favorite thing about 5T is, again, it helps the frame that you take in information, or you assess your own reasons for maybe feeling emotional or uncomfortable when you are taking in information or just operating in a given environment. So in many ways, when most of the world is not black and white, basically nothing is absolute black and white. There's going to be nuance everywhere.
Yeah.
You're offering a gift when you tell someone, even if it's, again, like you said, you've talked about this before, I might be wrong. And maybe like there's so many complexities out there that are impossible to understand. But what 5T does is it requires questioning. And by the way, it doesn't seem like you're wrong too often with these concepts at all, or how they're being applied. But 5T requires questioning. And one of my
Yeah.
favorite cognitive strategies in response to stress is questioning, because when we are stressed, and that starts to take over our body through emotional reasoning, we tend to jump to conclusions. We have perceived a potential threat or thing we care about. Our amygdala is activated because that perception that we have, that sense that has come to our brain, has determined that this is something that is worth dialing into, that is a threat in some capacity, which is why the stress response is initiated. So, how do we remove, or at least decrease, that conclusion? And one way to do so is through questioning, because questioning requires activation of our prefrontal cortex. It requires executive function. It will help suppress pure emotional reasoning. And 5T does that. So I apply it to myself. I apply it to what I read. I actively seek out things, whether it's conversations or different writers who I may not disagree with on everything. However, applying 5T both to myself and them simultaneously really helps me practice cognitive flexibility. I love that system.
Yeah, and I talked about, you know, questions are more important than answers, right? And I think it's paraphrasing McLuhan, and it goes back to figure and ground, right? I have to I, what I can see is one thing, but what's beyond that is what I really need to understand. You know, I recently put out something when Jimmy Kimmel got suspended from a show, and you know Colbert's being canceled, and um Jimmy Fallon, who knows, is on the ropes. I don't know. And everybody wants to make it a political argument. But when you look at it through a McLuhan lens, you realize that late night talk shows are dead. And they died a long time ago. And how they died was, I think, by picking a tribal side and speaking to one and not the other. Whereas when you look at things like guys like Johnny Carson or Jay Leno and even David Letterman, you know, they they were speaking to everybody, and they weren't alienating half of the potential viewership, right? So this medium has been dying for years, and you know maybe there's some catalysts lately that bring it to attention or accelerate it, but it didn't just happen in a vacuum. And that was the whole point of the article, is that you have to look at the form, right? You have to look at what's behind everything that it is that you think you see. So if you think that this is a First Amendment, free speech, you know, left versus right thing, you've already failed. When you realize that it's a medium that didn't adapt and hasn't adapted to our, you know, quick fix social media, packetized media culture, then you realize that, or long form podcasts, you know, long form discussions like this, where you're less likely to be taken out of context because a record that explains things beyond, you know, the time allotted through commercial breaks, you know, you learn a lot more, and you can see a lot more. And that medium, I think, is winning. That's why Rogan is so popular, and that's why late night talk shows are dying, and that's why more people are prone to listen to, you know, even Bill Maher's podcast. I don't know if you've watched that at all ever, but his podcast, he'll have people he agrees with, people he disagrees with, or whatever. And the fact that he puts out so much content that it's hard to just take his clips from his show out of context, because there's so much stuff that he said on the podcast to negate whatever somebody would be using against him. And that's all part of the medium, being the message, not so much the content. But that's another one that, you know, again, you can look at these patterns and you can start to say, yeah, these things are changing, and we're trying to hold on to legacy. It's another thing I talk a lot about, right? The guardians of decay, right? The guardians of decay love late night. They love late night talk shows. Um, I'm a Gen Xer. I used to like it. I love Jay Leno. I thought Jay Leno was epic. And he went after everybody, you know, and he had a completely different medium. But over time, those things just outlived their usefulness, because the medium has changed so much, and information has changed so much, and the environment, which is also the medium, and the technology, that's the things that make up the medium. Those things have changed so much, and a lot of people are still clinging on to the way things used to be. You know, we've always done it that way, or this is the way it's always been.
And it
But
makes
the
us feel
world,
like
yeah, it
that.
makes us feel comfortable.
Yeah, that tribal nature that people play into, because of course we evolved from hunter gatherers. Our ancestors did operate for the most part in tribes, but it was one tribe. It wasn't like in today's day and age. We're all going to be part of multiple tribes, and maybe our tribe at home is not the best environment, and therefore we seek out other tribes. But even if you have a great home environment or not, because of how connected we are digitally or through the jobs that we have, just civilization in general has caused us to become multi-tribal. And I think that can
Hmm.
pull us in different directions. And based on our psychology, that can be used against us, particularly when we don't feel fulfilled or are doing so well in a different domain. So it's always a shame when you see whether it's the late night talk shows. Because my family grew up when I was a kid, we watched Jay Leno all the time. That
Oh
was
yeah, I
that
went
show.
to a taping in California.
Did you?
Oh yeah, it was epic. Um, and I had a buddy of mine who was a production assistant for Jay, and the kindest, nicest guy. And we went out to dinner afterwards. I said, I got to ask, does he really like that? He goes, yeah, man, what you see is what you got. He is a legit, genuine dude. I don't know if you knew this. Like, I think it was last year, year before, like Jay Leno got into like an accident. Like he tumbled down a hill but he's staying at like a Comfort Inn or something like that because he's just not he's not like your typical type of A-lister that's got to stay in the Mandarin or whatever. But he's really down to earth, and my kids do not know him as the late night guy. You know, my kids are all in their early 20s, late teens now. But they know his car show. Like they
Yeah.
know him from, and my boys especially. And my my son Jack said he's 18 now, but when he was little, you know, he's still so into cars, and he loves Jay Leno's Garage. And he goes, "Dad, did you know that Jay Leno made all his money as a joke teller?" He had no idea, you know? Like,
Too funny.
that's
Yeah,
crazy.
that's exactly what it sounds like from, some connections that I have that knew him back in the day, like, just of the utmost character, nicest guy, basically only spent his money on cars, the money that he earns from all those great jokes on late night TV. But it is
Yeah.
I agree with you. Modern day, I don't care. I'm active duty, and even if I wasn't, I still like to remain pretty apolitical. I of course vote and I get involved in issues, but it's not because I'm a staunch right versus left or any other social issue. Like again, all of these things have nuance. People on both sides are probably doing the best they can with what they have. However, there are systems in place to really take advantage of that tribal nature we have. So when media outlets or late night TV or anything, when you can see that clear line that has been drawn, that unnecessary tribe that has been formed, it's disappointing on all sides of the aisle. But to your point, it also really limits your ability to grow, your ability to reorient, and your ability to thrive in a changing world that is inevitable. So inevitably, it's going to lead to your demise over time.
Yeah, the more I get into Boyd and McLuhan and Teilhard and Hayek and others, the more I realize, like to your point, you could be wrong, and I try to stay consistent. And I get people that say they would send me DMs. We kind of alluded to it, but they would send me DMs like, "Hey, write a 5T about Trump's State of the Union address, or you know, 5T Nancy Pelosi or whatever." And they're looking for like something to slap on somebody, and I tell them do it yourself. I mean, the reason I put it out there was so that you can go do this yourself, so that I don't have to do it for you. Um, but I do get a lot of people like they want to litmus test me. They want to know like, you know, what are your politics or what are your religion or whatever. And I put up an article. It's called "The Candle in the Silence." And anybody that wants to know what my political, they can read that and they can take it for what it is. But I'm always open to the idea that I could be wrong. So you have to be able to let go of something in light of new information. And that's something that both Boyd and McLuhan not only talked about but actually lived, because both of them, their thinking evolved. And you know, I'm not the same guy at 49 that I was at 19, and a lot has changed in 30 years, right? I mean, that's just the nature of VUCA. That's just the nature of orientation, that you know, through drift, just the passing time, changes, but also to changes through disruption and design. You know, how I choose to disrupt myself, and I choose to meet it with the design of thinking, say, like Boyd or McLuhan, or, um, you know, designing like the things that you talk about, like the, you know, fitness and frames of thinking around being resilient. You know, that's design. And I have to disrupt myself in order to implement that design. Ultimately, what I'm doing is I'm reorienting, and I'm open to that. You know, I'm open to the fact that I could be completely wrong. I mean, there was a time when we were talking about on the recording earlier about how, you know, a lot's changed since Ptolemy, right? A lot's changed since Copernicus. And if we stopped at Copernicus, we wouldn't know anything about like the galaxies and everything else. You know, you always have to be breaking things and moving fast and breaking things and changing your outlook on things, because that's the nature of the universe.
That's being a student for life. And
Yep.
it's continuous learning. And if you're not making mistakes, you're not learning. So like
Yeah.
what out of the domain, you have to be willing to mess up. And if you're doing it public facing, that just adds more pressure to it. Good on you, because then you're gonna prepare better, fail sooner, recognize mistakes, or maybe realize that you didn't make a mistakes, and then you'll use 5T based on how you're getting feedback. It's going to cause you to more efficiently evolve because, man, with so many good quotes on it, if you were the same person at 49 that you were at 19, you'd be a loser, just like I would be too. Even 10 years ago, I've changed
Well,
much if we're not evolving.
yeah, and you know, people that don't evolve. And you know people that they're stuck in high school, or through a marriage, like a partner doesn't evolve, or there's all kinds of examples where people just don't change, and then something becomes obsolete. I did an article a couple weeks ago about Blockbuster, and we were out in Oregon, and in Bend, Oregon is the last ever Blockbuster. It's the only Blockbuster left that's still a legit Blockbuster. You walk into it and it smells like it. And there was a time where there were, three within a 5 mile radius of where I lived. There were Blockbusters everywhere. But they ossified. They couldn't change. They couldn't adapt. They're stuck in they're stuck in a mindset. And, when you can't evolve, failing to evolve cognitively is a really bad spot, given the nature that the universe is always in a state of flux. It's in constant motion. I mean, when you think about the stuff that we're complaining about down here on Earth, when you look at, I saw this thing yesterday, it takes 27,000 years at the speed of light from where we are just to the center of our own galaxy, let alone all the billions that we can see out there. It's ridiculous. So does that mean, am I open to the fact that I might not know everything? Yeah. I'm absolutely. Are you comfortable not knowing everything? Absolutely. That's the nature of curiosity. It's someone I know that we both know, is always talking about the lack of curiosity, that people don't ask questions. Like, you go somewhere and they want to tell you, they want to give you the download. Ah, we did this and we went here, and oh yeah, da da da. My kid this and blah 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 blah. And they don't ask you a damn thing, and which is fine, because again, as Boyd and McLuhan would say, it's better to be an observer than a participant in a lot of ways. But curiosity is really, I think that's one thing. If I'm going to talk about like guys like Boyd and McLuhan, I mean, I think that's really one of the things that, among other traits, that's a trait that they certainly had, was a very sharp sense of curiosity.
Yeah, it's fun. I just gave a few keynotes this year to my grad school and undergrad for their audiology programs, and I decided to do it from the lens of resilience. No surprise, but I was just talking about what skills in life can kind of maximize your opportunity for thriving, and
Yeah.
curiosity was the first one that I talked about. Then authenticity, and go figure, resilience. But it's funny. Anytime I
What
talk
about
about
what about humility? Would the humility factor in there?
humility, absolutely would factor in there, but I think that would be an endless curiosity, because like if you're curious and you're assessing yourself,
You're
um,
humble.
then you're going to be more humble, right? So like if you're curious, you're not certain, and if you're not certain, then there's always opportunity to change. And as I gave the most recent speeches, I can still kind of remember, but even in my writing, anytime I talk in public lately, I've used the word before, but because of you, I use the terms orientation and reorientation all the time. But reorientation, it is absolutely just endless learning, being willing to be wrong. If you're just orienting and you're just following the bad boy, the standard OODA loop sketch, then you think you have it figured out in the orientation that you need to focus on based your observation. But you wisely stating reorientation, I think that is it's basically curiosity in the basic OODA loop sketch as he expanded to what it is. And the
Yeah.
reorientation, I think, is one of the most important skill sets that you can have for mental resilience, because that removes any certainty.
You wanna you want your competitors not to reorient. You want them to operate on a linear interpretation of OODA loop, and you want them to have a complete misunderstanding of John Boyd and Marshall McLuhan. Those are the competitors that you pray for. And I'm not shy, I try to remain humble, but I'm not shy about like commenting on something on LinkedIn or whatever that is just egregiously linear or
Yeah.
egregiously. I do probably, I can be pretty aggressive about defending Boyd's authenticity, because I think that's important. If you mischaracterize someone that didn't get much credit in his own lifetime, who our understanding, most of it comes after his death. But when you mischaracterize it, it really is a shitty thing to do, and it also shows a lack of poor scholarship. So I'm not afraid to call that out. But I've flat out told people, I've reposted things on LinkedIn's a dead medium anyway, like that, like anybody listens anymore. But I would repost things and say, This is exactly what you want your competitors operating with, because if they're operating with this understanding of OODA loop, you're going to win every time.
And old Blockbuster, outdated loop. They were at the top of the
Yeah.
they didn't evolve in any way. And the imitators, they never reached Blockbuster. So the Family Videos of the world or whatever the other chains were, that they did things slightly different. But no, they were all taken out by someone who just reoriented to deliver the same kind of technology in a new way.
That they could have bought. They could have bought Netflix. That's the craziest thing in the world, and um uh profound autism mom Sarah said it also uses less energy. When you reorient it, it uses a lot less energy, because the more oriented you are to reality, with implicit guidance and control, you can sense faster and you can act faster. So as you reorient and as you stay focused, that's using less energy. It takes more energy. Think about, like, Kodak is another great one. They invented digital photography. It's crazy to say it, but they invented what brought them down. And had they, it takes less energy to learn and reorient to something new, rather than all the damage that came with it. That took a lot of expended energy.
Early
Um,
Sarah's phenomenal, by the way. I did a podcast with her recently. She's incredible. I'm such a big fan of her account. But I couldn't agree with her more, because early intervention, once you recognize an opportunity, and if you are reorienting always, as soon as you realize there's another opportunity to at least consider it, even if it's not wrong, it's going to be way better than all the work and energy that'll take down the fact when it is shown to you because it's delivered on your front door in your face because you are slipping incredibly. So, yeah, early intervention always in all domains. And
yeah, so think of it as implicit guidance and control. The OODA loop sketch with early intervention would be reoriented to the point where what you're seeing, what you're perceiving, is actually matching up to reality, and that's in your implicit guidance and control. In other words, you shaping how you sense things. You're able to catch things faster than those that don't. It's the same thing with action. You can make faster actions, you can make faster decisions, the more that orientation is wired and focused and zeroed in on what's actually going on. That's the whole point. I mean, that's the and that's a lower energy. That's a lower energy approach.
100.
Um, yeah,
And being open to it because you're curious in any forms of feedback from your own application of the OODA loop sketch or from feedback from the world that's going to come your way, whether it's from other people. But curiosity, and point with your humility before, I'm always curious, particularly in any critical feedback that I get. So I like hearing the good stuff, but I love hearing opportunities from other people or just straight up haters. I'll always give it a lens of opportunity through curiosity, and then apply without me actually like writing down the 5T. Like, you've given me frameworks in my head. John Boyd, Marshall McLuhan, through you, have given me frameworks in my head to just be more curious, ask questions about the different ways I'm assessing what is happening every day, so I can still continue to show up and evolve. Because again, I don't want to get stuck in my ways by thinking I have resilience figured out or audiology figured out or being a good dad and husband figured out. No way at all. Curiosity forever.
that's why in after action reviews, when you just get good news and glowing reports, they're shit. Um, when we talk a lot about red teaming, right? And red teaming evolved from the idea of when we were training in the military. There's blue and there's red. The red team is the opposition. Um, Close friend of the family from growing up, one of my dad's fellow West Pointers, retired as a lieutenant general, and I remember having a discussion about him about you know practice and learning and after action reviews and debriefing, and he said when we would go out to the National Training Center in Fort Irwin, California, and we would slaughter the opposing forces, I hated it because I got no feedback, so I had no idea where I needed to work on, where when he had a battalion or had a brigade or even at the division level. He's like, the best learning experiences was when I went out there and I got my ass handed to me, because then I was able to see what I needed to fix before, one day he did get his chance to lead a division into combat. It was then that all of those beatings from the opposing forces at Fort Irwin paid off, because all the learning had been done all that necessary, failure. There's a good kind of failure too. It's not all bad. And in that is the growth, that pain, that agony, that embarrassment, or whatever it is. That's the mismatch, because Boyd talks all the time about mismatches. Those are the mismatches that we have to address to get better. So he says, when I would go out there and everything was hunky dory and we won, like, that's when I knew it was the hour of maximum danger. There was something that was missed, that we missed, that we don't know about, that we're going to have to go in and do it again. And this time get our butts kicked, and then we'll figure out what it actually, what actually was the problem. And then also to be honest about it. That was the other thing that he was talking about. You have to be the most excruciatingly honest when you self-reflect on these things, to uncover those things. Because if you don't, you're going to get your ass handed to you. And that's what you don't want to have do. So there again is where the applicability in any domain, when you understand these things, because that's the other thing about this, Kyle. Everybody's doing this inherently. Everybody observe, orient, decides, act, inherently. They're all doing this. When you understand it, that's when you can get better at it. That's when you can start to see the changes that you need to make in order to make the necessary improvements, so that you can thrive and not merely survive.
It's so well put. Now, talking about living consciously versus unconsciously, and this is what your account does. It helps the OODA loop become conscious, so you can understand it better and apply it to your life. Because the environment and all of the inputs are going to shape you. And if you are not asking yourself questions using something like the 5T framework, then it's still going to be happening. You're still doing it. You just don't know you're doing it, and you're falling further and further into these unnecessary tribes, using more and more energy and not evolving. And to your point about training, making your training extremely difficult so you do fail safely physically, but psychologically making that as unsafe perceptually as possible, to where you are truly uncomfortable. There's a place for training where it's relatively easy, so you can keep your edge sharpened and maintain performance. But if you're trying to get better, keeping your training easy is not going to do that. You have to make yourself uncomfortable. And this is true of every domain. And then the more you understand your opportunities, the more you can thrive and not just survive, like you said. That was just so beautifully put.
Yeah.
Brother, we've done an hour and a half way too easily. I feel like I scratched the surface with a few notes I made myself this morning.
Should we take questions? I got time for questions if anybody has any.
Absolutely. And
See
the
if we
link.
missed any.
I'm terrible about live questions. You're a pro at this live stuff. I just basically talk and then come back to things later and throw things in the summary post. But the links
So,
that you
so
shared.
Fred Leland said, "Gotta run, go Red Sox." Of course, he saw the hat. He's a Bostonian. Fred Leland, for those that don't know, was one of our earliest guests on No Way Out. He's a retired police officer, and he actually teaches these concepts to law enforcement organizations all around the country. Yeah, let's see. Rob Grock, the world. Yeah, you can't see the faults in the system from within it. Yep, that's the whole point of understanding destruction and creation. I was just discussing why this is the conditioned expectation of autism parents who look worn out. Forget what we were talking about at that point. War fighting?
Maybe.
Okay, Andrew had asked about what Marshall McLuhan books. I think we covered that. Go back and read the article, the Playboy interview. The deliberate typo. Yeah, so the medium is the massage is the title of the video, and that was a typo with the production company. And McLuhan loved, like, puns and shit like that. So he says, "No, leave it. No, don't change it. Leave it the way it is. Don't make it the medium as the message. Make it the medium as the massage, because really what happens is the medium massages you into thinking a certain way." Right down, he goes back. If you read his book Understanding Media, it goes all the way back to written language. Like, written language is a technology that trains us to operate linearly in a certain way. And I'd always read that and, like, the hell's McLuhan talking about? Like, I don't really get that. Like we need to read, we need to see things, but the written word is actually an extension of your eye, because all medium, all technology are some extension of a human faculty. Like all the electronic media, especially that he talks about in that video, are extensions of our central nervous system. the the language thing really hit me when I read Alan Watts's book, Tao and the Watercourse Way, which is one of the books that was on John Boyd's list that he read. And he's describing Chinese written language, which is like 30,000 characters or more, and they're actually pictures. And they have nonlinear meanings. It could be both a noun and a verb at the same time, or it could mean this and that at the same time. So that there's more dimension versus just a linear, like start left and read right, start left and read right. Which is Andrew asks, how would you recommend framing these concerts for a boutique?
Probably concept.
Probably concepts for a boutique turnaround. Well, I mean, that's what Ponch and I do professionally for a living, other than write on the Whirl of Reorientation and on the No Way Out podcast. But you know, engaging leaders, but building an internal component where you're not offering a one size fits all solution. I think that most consultants try to overlay a templated way of thinking versus getting in there and understanding what's actually going on the ground. If you want to DM me directly, I mean, I could do a show just about this. And I've written some stuff around, if you type in on the Whirl of Reorientation, One Tribe at a Time, which is, was a white paper from the Afghan War by James Gant, and it talks about tribal liaison. I spent 2 years as a liaison officer, so that kind of, say, boutique turnaround consulting, I mean, that was kind of my thing in the military sense of going in, advising a unit's leadership, getting them to, and then being a bridge between two worlds, representing one world and also representing them to that world, and being the conduit to help them understand, and then collectively essentially create value together, what we would call it in the business world. In the liaison sense, I guess it was destroy things more effectively. But yeah, I've written a lot about that concept, Andrew. I haven't published a lot of it. There's probably some more things I could publish about it. There's a lot that I don't know, I keep professionally, but it's lost on most people. Like I would, even when I was in asset management, I would try to teach these concepts of, liaison and being an embedded liaison and getting that, helping them understand like just the nature of advisory. Like, and then like you say advisory and everybody thinks financial advisory, like they can't even make the leap to understand that a word could have different meanings and different environments to help make them better and do things that mutually benefit. But the one cool thing about, I thought that the Marine Corps was really good at was teaching liaison officers and how to do that. And I think that it works in consulting. It certainly works in sales too. And I've written about sales. I put a lot of this stuff in the private chat too, and the private chat of the Whirl is for paid subscribers. So I put a lot of my thinking that I don't put publicly. I put that in the chat for paid subscribers on the Whirl. I have written about this actual topic about, if you go in the paid chat, you'd see like what was the number one sales book of all time, but I won't say it out loud here. Yeah, no. So we also have our founders level, which we offer flexible pricing. So all you have to do is put $1 more than an annual plan. And in that we do monthly Zooms with thinkers. So we had John Robb last month. We had retired Major General Tank Leonard from the Air Force, who was one of our earliest podcast guests and a scholar on Boyd. He was in August, and then our October one's actually coming really fast. It's actually going to be this Thursday, and it's Andrew McLuhan is coming to talk about his grandfather and his grandfather's work and how to understand media. So, I think we're trying to bring differentiated value and build a tribe at the Whirl, and around No Way Out too, because we understand that not everybody's going to be into it, which is great because that means your competitors aren't. And if your competitors aren't into it, that's actually really good for you. Phil Gentile, who has the military reading room, he says, I joined late, so apologies if you covered this. But did Boyd and McLuhan? No. Yeah, Boyd, to our knowledge, Boyd and McLuhan did not correspond. Boyd, it's likely that he would have heard about McLuhan, because if McLuhan was this high priest of pop culture in the 60s, you would think that Boyd, but Boyd was busy with other things at that time, energy maneuverability theory and the Vietnam War. So he might not have had time to really get into McLuhan's work. What Andrew McLuhan, I had sent him years ago when we got connected. I had sent him John Boyd's reading list, and Phil, I can send it to you. In fact, Chet Richards puts it on his website, slightly east of New. You can read the Boyd papers from Quantico of all the books that we have in the archives. And there are no McLuhan books in the archives. But what it was interesting when Andrew said, I'm amazed that there are none, because he has everybody else. Like he basically bracketed all around McLuhan, but never read McLuhan to our knowledge. One of the books that was not on the list, and Phil knows this book, I'm sure, and I've actually written about it on the Whirl, is The Psychology of Military Incompetence by Norman Dixon, and that was published in 1976. And I had asked G.I. Wilson on our podcast, and G.I. Wilson was a collaborator of Boyd from 1979 in the Marine Corps till his death, and Boyd's death in 97. And I asked G.I., this book isn't on Boyd's list. And he's like, it wasn't on his list at the archives, but he knew that book. And I would highly recommend that book, The Psychology of Military Incompetence. That's the book. As midshipmen or cadets, we should have gotten that book then. There's two books. And Sam Alimo and Adam Krause and I were just talking about this. Number one, a fiction and a nonfiction. The fiction book is Once an Eagle by Anton Myrer. That should be on anybody that knows somebody getting commissioned or at West Point or Annapolis or Air Force Academy or Coast Guard Academy. You want to get that guy or that young man or that young woman a gift, get them Anton Meyer's Once an Eagle and tell them write it in the front. Hey, congratulations on getting into West Point. Don't be Courtney Massengale, love Uncle Mark or whatever. That book is so critical. And I'd written about it too, and I've talked about it. That book is also critical for leaders in the corporate world. They should read that book too, because there's Massengales all over the corporate world. And if you got to know the difference between a Sam Damon and a Courtney Massengale, you kind of have to read the book, Once an Eagle by Anton Myrer, who, by the way, was a Marine that fought in the Pacific. The other book is the one I was mentioning, the nonfiction, is Norman Dixon's Psychology of Military Incompetence. That book should be required reading at every academy, every ROTC program. Anybody that goes to OCS, they should read that book, because there's so much of learning, like how not to become a Massengale, of what not to do, which can be just as important as, what to do. So those books are really good. And I think that they orient you around the concepts of leadership. In the Boyd sense, I would say, understand the difference between command and control and appreciation and leadership. And if I knew those books, that would make perfect sense to me. And I do know those books, but I would recommend that others do too. But yeah, that was a long way of answering Phil's question. Boyd and McLuhan did not correspond. And there's nothing that suggests, there's no evidence that suggests that they ever knew each other.
It's awesome, though. And you alluded to this, but in my opinion, the most credible and best consultants, coaches, mentors, you name it, they're not trying to teach you tactics to live by and have them be that resource that you have to come to for answers all the time. They're trying to teach you systems and or concepts that you can apply to your own life specifically. And I get that a lot from your account. I assume that's exactly what you're doing through AGLX and the company that you're working with. And of course, all the consultant work that you do on top of it.
We stand on authenticity, co-creation of value, and networking. Those are the components of what we do. If you can't co-create value, it usually is because one side's not learning. And I can assure you, it's not us. again, Punch and I are constantly throwing things at each other. Oh, dude, look what I read. Oh man, I was just at this thing and I saw this. Oh, dude, have you heard about this? Like we're constantly doing that. And then the company that we keep also are constantly challenging us to think like that too. And we surround ourselves with the Kyle Shepherds of the world and the Sam Alimas of the world and the Adam Carouses of the world and the Sarah Kurians of the world and the Phil Gentiles of the world, right? We're constantly being challenged to change our thinking and to promote our thinking and to not be static, to have a dynamic orientation, because as soon as you get static, you are vulnerable. And in this day and age, you will be done really, really, really fast.
I'm very grateful to be part of that circle and the names that you just mentioned, man. I learn from you every day. You teach me how to stay curious. You teach me how to think, how to orient in the world, how to take a lot of the external inputs and environments and apply concepts to analyze them with cognitive flexibility. Thank you so much for this conversation, man. This has
Yeah,
been an
we're
absolute pleasure.
we're grateful for your recommendations and recommending our site and listening to our podcast. There's a special on paid membership to October 15th. And flexible pricing is open, like I said, for founders, and that's where you're getting the sort of the one-on-ones in the briefing room with the Andrew McLuhans of the world, the John Robs of the world. So we're trying to keep, we're trying to make sure that we're delivering value in that sense to our core constituency, which we have. It's a very high engaging network. This is a very active group of people that are constantly, again, networking, co-creating value with authenticity.
And you 100% are. I consume far more than I create on Substack, and I create quite a bit these days. I'm a fan of so many accounts, but I only recommend a handful, and there's a reason for that. It's because they offer the most value to my life and my perspective and my training and my orientation. And there's
Yeah.
yeah, I'm honored to do it. I appreciate you, and thank you again for this conversation today, brother.
Yeah, I'm thankful for this opportunity and for everybody that joined us. Thanks a lot, and thanks for subscribing.
Absolutely. Take care, Mark. Talk soon.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle.